Hannah, thank you very much for joining us today. If you wouldn't mind, could you give our viewers and listeners a brief summary of what's happened to you over the last few months?
Basically, I was told that I was going to be receiving a new child into my class in a new September term who wanted to identify as a boy, although she was born a girl. And I was very concerned about the effect it might have on this child if I was to affirm her in basically what amounts to a belief that she's born in a wrong body.
Mm.
I didn't want to go along with calling her by the name and pronouns that she was requested, mainly, well, entirely really, because I believe that that's actually quite harmful and psychologically quite damaging for an 8-year-old child. Anyway, I raised my concerns with the head teacher. I was warned that because I was refusing to do this, that it might be seen as discriminatory and that I might be suspended as a result of my refusal to go along with this. And there was negotiations going on about, whether I could actually come round to calling the child by the name that they requested, even though they were not in my class anymore. One of the first things they did was to move the child out of my class.
Mm.
But they were saying, in any case, we would still require you to do this. And I just wasn't going to go along with it. I felt that it was still continuing to be damaging to the child to do that. So on that basis, they suspended me. We had to come to some negotiation. At that point, I got some legal advice about the situation, and my lawyers. I went to Christian Concern to get help because I am a Christian, and
Yes.
I firmly believe that Jesus Christ said, "Don't harm children," and I want to live by that in all good conscience.
It's quite a good thing to live by.
Anyway, I went to them for advice, and they were able to um, negotiate with the school and explain to them that actually what was happening was that they were compelling me to act in a way that
Mm.
was against my conscience and my beliefs, and to speak in a way that was against my conscience. So, with some toing and froing and some agreements that were made, I was finally able to be reinstated in school. However, although we navigated that, I was still very concerned about the ongoing welfare of this child.
Mm.
And from the very beginning, I had always said I felt that this approach of affirming them in their beliefs was actually harmful. The question I was always asking was, are we doing harm? Can we, look into this and have a proper discussion about this? And so it came to the point where I formally raised it as a safeguarding concern. So having spoken to the head teacher, I sent a letter to the head and the governors of this school. They basically dismissed my concerns and said, from their point of view, the school had done everything that was procedurally correct. They'd gone through the right channels to get advice and all the rest of it. But the one thing they didn't engage with was hundreds of pages of evidence from experts who had worked in this field, medical experts, an endocrinologist, a psychotherapist, a psychologist. I presented them this evidence. All these medical experts were saying, don't affirm a child. It does far more damage than good.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing they seemed unable to engage with. They weren't
Right.
happy to engage with that. So
Well, that's what gets me, Hannah, because they said that you were being discriminatory, yet they were discriminating against you and your beliefs by compelling you to go along with theirs. But it is a set of beliefs, because clearly, if you're presenting them with evidence and they don't want to take it on board, it's because they've already subscribed to an ideology, and that's what we're seeing here, isn't it? And I think you addressed the psychological concerns of this this young girl, bless her, and I'm sorry for how she's been treated, and I'm also sorry for how
Yeah,
you've been treated. But
yeah,
of course, there's always the physical risk too, because we're talking here about a young girl, an 8-year-old girl who's going to be sharing toilets and changing rooms and stuff with young boys. That's inappropriate. Of course, that's a safeguarding concern.
absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, when it's not just this girl is sharing toilets with boys, that impacts on the boys as well. You know, we hear an awful lot of narrative about women's invaded spaces, and I think it goes both ways. What about the invaded spaces of a 9-year-old boy?
Mm.
You know, and talking about the physicality, of course, there is the danger that as the child becomes entrenched in this belief that the answer to any problems they have is to have their body altered.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that can lead them to make quite drastic decisions about body altering solutions. You know, they will be looking out to go onto puberty blockers, for example, cross-sex hormones, surgery. We've seen this happening in America a lot, of course. They seem to be ahead of us in this.
Well, it's happening a lot here as well. You know, the whole
It
tax report
is.
shows that. And I think as a Christian, your concern would be for the welfare of this child, because you would tell the child that you love them as they are and that Christ loves them as they are. And actually, God
Yeah,
designed them that way on purpose, so that
yeah.
you are your body and you are your soul, and that physically changing your body isn't going to make you any happier or any more loved. But I think you're right in raising this safeguarding concern for the welfare of the child. What I'm concerned about is that we saw in the policy exchange report that not enough teachers and parents are standing up to raise concerns. And now we're seeing perhaps why the way that you've been treated might put people off whistleblowing.
Well, that's exactly it, and I think there lies the problem, and you know the issue is as well that when you try to raise it with a school, you feel as though the leadership in the school are so bought into this ideology or to the principle that we shouldn't offend, we shouldn't cause offence to a child, that could be so damaging that they can't hear what you're saying. It's as if they can't engage in any other narrative that would try to demonstrate what is really in the best interest of children. And of course, yeah, you know that you're going to put your job on the line if you raise this because of the culture that we're in at the moment. And it makes it, I feel, I mean, I actually do feel for head teachers who are put in this position, because the guidelines from the government are so woolly that they've almost been put in the place of having to make a kind of a decision that really only a doctor should be making.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Teachers are not trained for this kind of decision. I wanted to ask you, but I won't, about this particular child, whether their parents have been informed. But I won't ask you because it's not relevant. I'd rather be broader about this, because so many parents aren't being informed that their children are changing genders and changing names. And teachers are being put in the position of having to affirm or not. And that's not a teacher's job. That's not what a teacher's trained for. But all of this is being led by children. And of course, adults are supposed to be leading in education, not children. But what I do want to say is that, you know, the government have been fluffy, but at the same time, the government has expressly put out explicit material saying you cannot be teaching from mermaids and particular organizations that have a political ideology. However, it seems your school was taking on board material from mermaids. So even when the government does put out guidance that's supposed to help, it's being ignored.
Yes, that's right. And I think the thing is, one of the things that the school seemed to be was that, you know, they seemed quite respectful of the fact that some of the materials that they were using had been informed by, you know, organizations such as Stonewall and stuff. It's like, well, we respect these organizations. They've done a lot to prevent the bullying of the LGBTQ you know, people, and all that's all well and good, but then it's like they're looking to them to steer them in all decision making, and it's not helpful. That's something that schools really need to address, because they see them as very respectful, and yet actually it's steering them down a path where there is no room for debate. There is no room for actually grasping that question and saying, are we doing harm? Can we be impartial about this? it's not impartial. So yeah, I mean, the school probably thought that they were doing well by using these materials, and these materials are in every school. The school I was at, I wouldn't say it was a school where they were pushing the agenda as much as they were being informed by it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that all schools think that that's the way to go.
That's one thing. If anyone takes anything away from this interview, that's what I want it to be. That if you are a parent, ask what is being taught in your child's school. Don't assume that your school isn't doing this, because so many schools are doing this. And even if they are not outwardly political, the resources that they're using are being informed by this ideology. Hannah, all that remains for me to say is, even though the C of E's guidance is fluffy and the government's guidance is fluffy, you stuck to your faith and you stuck to your guns and you looked out for that child and that child's safeguarding. So thank you very much for doing what you did. And please continue to fight back. God bless you.
Thank you.